He came to the mountains to outrun memories that had the persistence of shadows, clinging to him even in the brightest sun. Cole had once moved through a world of noise and speed, of shouted commands and the deafening finality of action. Now, he sought the opposite. He sought a silence so profound it might scour his mind clean, a stillness so absolute it could absorb the tremors that still ran through his hands in the quiet hours before dawn. This small patch of wilderness in the granite heart of the Sierra Nevada, with its cold, clear lake and a sky that seemed to go on forever, was to be his sanctuary or his tomb. He hadn't decided which. He was a man in his 40s, but the years had been unkind, carving lines around his eyes that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with things seen. He was tall and lean, built from the hard, economical lines of a life in the special forces. His movements were spare, efficient, each one with a purpose. He wore what amounted to a uniform, a faded olive M65 field jacket that had seen more countries than most people ever would, a simple plaid flannel shirt, worn cargo pants, and leather boots that were molded to the shape of his feet and his history. On his wrist, a military-issue watch, its face scratched, its ticking a steady, indifferent companion. It was the only clock he answered to now. His world had been reduced to the essentials: his Eberly stock half-track backpack, the knife on his belt, and the dog. The dog was Boone, a German shepherd, broad in the chest and with a noble, intelligent head. Like Cole, Boone was a veteran. His muzzle was turning a soft, distinguished gray, and his eyes held a calm, knowing depth. He was not a pet, he was a partner. In the desert, Boone's nose had been the difference between a hidden pressure plate and another day of life. He had been trained for war, and the discipline had settled into his bones. He never barked without reason. He never wasted emotion. He moved beside Cole with a quiet dignity, his presence a solid, grounding force in Cole's fractured world. Boone was never entirely off duty, and neither was Cole. They were two old soldiers standing a lonely watch. They had a routine. In the mornings, they would walk the perimeter of the small clearing where Cole had pitched his tent. Cole would drink his coffee, black and bitter, from a tin cup, while Boone sat, alert and assessing, his ears twitching at the scurry of a squirrel or the distant call of a hawk. Cole sometimes thought the dog was judging his campsite, the way he'd pitched the tent just a little off level. Boone had a way of looking at him that felt like a quiet, superior critique from a seasoned NCO. The thought was the closest Cole came to humor these days, a dry, internal flicker that never reached his lips. After the morning patrol, they would trek. Cole walked not for destination, but for distance, hoping to physically exhaust the ghosts that followed him. He knew their names. He knew the weight of the choice he had made under a sky the color of dust and smoke. He had followed an order that felt wrong in his gut, a command that resulted in a good man not coming home. The mission was a success, they had told him, but Cole's soul had registered it as a catastrophic failure, a moral debt he could never repay. So he walked, trying to leave the man who made that choice behind him, one punishing step at a time. It was on one of these treks, late in the afternoon when the sun slanted low and turned the forest into a cathedral of light and shadow, that the routine broke. They were near the base of a roaring waterfall that cascaded down a sheer granite cliff, feeding the lake. The air was thick with mist and the thunder of plunging water, a constant cleansing roar that usually soothed Cole's frayed nerves. He had stopped to refill his canteen from a stream that branched off the main fall, the water so cold it made his teeth ache. Boone, who had been sniffing at the base of a fern clump, suddenly went rigid. It was not the alert posture of a dog that had scented a deer or a bear. This was different. Cole knew the signs. He had seen this exact stillness a dozen times before, always preceding the discovery of something dangerous, something hidden. Boone's head was cocked, his ears locked forward. His breathing, usually a soft pant, had ceased altogether. The fur along his spine was raised in a tight, sharp ridge. He took a single, deliberate step forward, then another. His nose pointed not at the ground, but at the wall of rock behind the curtain of water. Cole set his canteen down, his own senses instantly sharpening. The roar of the waterfall was immense, a physical pressure, but through it, he could feel the intensity of Boone's focus. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his voice swallowed by the noise. Boone ignored him. He moved with a purpose that was absolute, pushing through the thick, wet ferns at the edge of the cascade. He slipped behind the thundering sheet of water, disappearing into the dark, wet space between the falls and the cliff face. Cole's heart gave a hard, sudden kick against his ribs. He trusted the dog's instincts more than he trusted his own. Without a second thought, he followed. Pushing through the heavy, cold spray was like walking through a wall. The water was shocking, stealing his breath. Behind the cascade, a narrow, slippery ledge ran along the rock. The air was thick and smelled of wet stone and ancient, undisturbed earth. The roar was even louder here, a deafening, encompassing thunder that vibrated through the soles of his boots. In the dim, refracted light, he saw Boone. The dog was standing at the back of the alcove, his body pressed against the rock face. He wasn't sniffing or digging. He was simply standing there, utterly still, his nose less than an inch from the stone. It was a posture of indication, a silent, definitive statement. Here. Cole moved carefully along the ledge, his hand braced against the cold, weeping rock. He knelt beside Boone, running a hand down the dog's back. The muscles there were coiled like steel springs. "Easy," Cole said, though he knew the word was for himself. He looked at the spot Boone was indicating. It looked like the rest of the cliff face, a dark, moss-covered expanse of granite. But as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw what Boone had sensed. A line. A faint, almost invisible seam in the rock, unnaturally straight. It formed the top and one side of a perfect rectangle, about 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. Moss and mineral deposits had worked to conceal it over decades, perhaps centuries. But it was there. It was a door. Cole ran his fingers over the seam. The rock felt different here, smoother. He pushed, expecting solid stone, but felt a fractional, infinitesimal give. A tremor. This was not natural. This was made, and it was hidden in a place no one would ever think to look. The unease that had been a low hum in his blood for years sharpened into a clear, high note of adrenaline. Boone let out a low, barely audible whine, a sound of profound urgency. He looked from the seam to Cole, his intelligent eyes asking a question Cole couldn't yet answer. Something was in there. Something that had waited in the dark for a very long time. And Boone, his faithful, silent partner, had just led him straight to it. Cole worked with the methodical patience his training had ingrained in him. He took the folding knife from his belt, the steel a familiar weight in his hand. Using the tip, he began to painstakingly scrape away the accumulated grime and moss from the seam. The work was slow, tedious. The air behind the waterfall was cold, and the constant spray soaked through his jacket, chilling him to the bone. Boone sat patiently, a silent, watchful sentinel, his gaze never leaving the hidden door. The dog's certainty was a palpable force, reinforcing Cole's own resolve. As he cleared the edges, the geometry became clearer. It was not stone, but metal. A thick iron plate, cunningly fitted and textured to resemble the surrounding granite. He found the hinges on the left side, fused by rust into solid masses of orange-brown decay. On the right, He uncovered what looked like a recessed handle, a simple iron loop now clogged with dirt and corrosion. There was no visible lock. It seemed to have been sealed from the inside, or by some mechanism now lost to time. He spent the better part of an hour clearing the perimeter, his mind a quiet, focused blank. This was what he was good at. A problem, a physical obstacle, something to be assessed and overcome. It was a relief from the shapeless, unbeatable enemy within his own head. When he was done, he sat back on his heels, studying his work. The door was an old, stubborn fact set into the mountain's heart. He tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. He put his shoulder to the plate and pushed, leveraging his weight against it. Nothing. The seal was absolute. He needed leverage. He thought for a moment, then slipped back out through the curtain of water. The sudden re-entry into the light and open air was disorienting. He scanned the dense woods near the base of the falls until he found what he was looking for. A fallen pine, its wood hard and seasoned. Using a small camp saw from his pack, he cut a 6-foot length, trimming it into a crude but effective lever. Back in the echoing dark of the alcove, he jammed the sharpened end of the pole into the seam near the bottom of the door. He took a deep breath, the cold, misty air filling his lungs, and put his full weight on the makeshift pry bar. For a moment, nothing happened. The wood groaned in protest. The mountain held its silence. Then, with a deep, grating shriek of tortured metal, something gave. A crack of darkness appeared along the bottom edge. A puff of stale, dead air, colder than the cave itself, washed over him. It was the smell of a place that had not breathed for a very long time. Dry, dusty, and utterly sterile. Boone rose to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Cole worked the lever again, widening the gap. The hinges screamed, shedding flakes of rust. With a final convulsive shudder, the door swung inward, scraping against a stone floor. It opened onto absolute blackness. He retrieved a small, powerful flashlight from his pack. He clicked it on, the beam cutting a sharp white cone into the dark. It was a tunnel. Not a natural cave, but a man-made passage. Its walls roughly hewn but straight, its ceiling supported by thick, rotting timbers. The air was heavy, still. The silence within was a different kind of silence from the wilderness outside. This was the silence of a sealed tomb. He looked at Boone. The dog stood at the threshold, peering into the darkness, but he did not enter. He looked back at Cole, a clear warning in his eyes. "Be careful." "I will be," Cole said softly. "Stay here. Watch." Boone sat, his posture rigid, his focus absolute. He was on guard. Cole took a step inside. The floor was level, covered in a fine layer of dust that puffed up around his boots. The beam of his flashlight played over the walls, revealing the marks of pickaxes in the stone. This was old work. Mining, perhaps. But the tunnel was too wide, too straight for a simple exploratory shaft. It felt more like a railway tunnel, though there were no tracks. He walked forward, his footsteps the only sound in the profound quiet. The flashlight beam danced ahead of him, a nervous, searching thing. The tunnel ran straight for perhaps 100 yards before the beam caught something ahead. A shape. Something large and dark blocking the way. As he drew closer, the shape resolved itself. It was massive, metallic, and impossibly out of place. It was a railroad car. He stopped, his breath catching in his throat. It was an old passenger car, the kind he'd only seen in black and white photographs. It was painted a dark green, now faded and peeling. It sat perfectly on a short, isolated section of track that seemed to begin and end right here, in the heart of the mountain. The tunnel didn't go anywhere. It existed solely to contain this car. This wasn't a crash. It wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate act of concealment. The rail car had been placed here, and the mountain had been sealed around it. He ran his light along its length. The windows were dark, covered from the inside. The doors were shut. He felt a prickle of cold dread run down his spine. This was a place of secrets, and secrets, in his experience, were always paid for in blood. He walked the length of the car, his boots crunching softly in the dust. At the far end, the tunnel terminated in a solid wall of rock and earth, a cave-in, but one that looked deliberate, a final, permanent seal. He returned to the nearest door on the car. It was a heavy, sliding door, its handle thick with rust. He gripped it with both hands and pulled. It resisted, groaning, then slid open a few inches with a screech that echoed down the tunnel like a scream. The air that seeped out was the same stale, dead air from the entrance, but with something else beneath it. A faint, metallic, and slightly chemical scent. He forced the door open wider, enough to slip through, and shone his light inside. The beam swept across rows of seats. Their upholstery rotted away to reveal the springs beneath. Dust motes danced in the white light like frantic, tiny ghosts. But it wasn't just a passenger car. It had been modified. In the center of the car, several rows of seats had been removed to make space for shelves. The shelves were neatly stacked with canned goods, military-style rations from a bygone era, tins of water, boxes of medical supplies. It was a fallout shelter, a time capsule of Cold War paranoia. But there was more. At one end of the car, a desk was bolted to the floor. On it sat a bulky piece of electronic equipment, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, its spools still threaded with tape. Beside it lay a logbook, its leather cover cracked with age. Cole moved toward it, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was the story, the what and the why. He reached out, his fingers hesitating just above the book's cover. He could feel the weight of the years, the pressure of the silence. This was not his business. He had come to these mountains to escape the world, to shed responsibility, to be left alone. But the discipline of a lifetime, the instinct to investigate, to know, was too strong. His past had taught him that secrets left to fester in the dark always became poison. With a sense of crossing a threshold from which there was no return, he picked up the logbook. The dry leather felt fragile in his hand, a testament to a truth that had been buried for more than half a century. Cole carried the logbook back out into the dim light of the alcove behind the waterfall. He didn't want to read it in the tomb-like dark of the tunnel. He needed air, however damp and cold. Boone rose to greet him, sniffing at the leather-bound book as if it were a living thing with a story to tell. Cole sat on the slippery ledge, his back against the cold granite, and opened it. The first page was a date, June 4th, 1958. The handwriting was a neat, disciplined cursive, the ink faded but perfectly legible. The entry was brief. Final seal is complete. Air quality is stable. All systems operational. Abernathy. Signing off. Abernathy. The name meant nothing to him, but the tone was familiar. It was the detached, professional language of a man completing a technical task. Cole thumbed through the pages. The entries continued, day after day. They were meticulous records of air pressure, humidity, battery levels, and supply inventories. For the first few weeks, that was all. A man doing a job. But then the tone began to shift. The entries grew longer. The professional detachment began to fray, replaced by something else. Frustration. Then anger. Then a quiet, simmering despair. July 12th, 1958. No signal. No contact. The protocol was clear. 30 days of silent running, then establish communication. It has been 38.
Either the equipment has failed or they are not answering.
I pray it is the equipment.
Cole felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just a shelter. It was a prison. Abernathy wasn't hiding. He had been left here. He continued to read, the roar of the waterfall a fitting soundtrack to the unfolding tragedy. Abernathy wrote about the project. He had been a combat engineer, a geological expert tasked with overseeing the construction of this secret monitoring station for the Atomic Energy Commission. Its purpose was to listen for the seismic signatures of clandestine nuclear tests. The rail car was a state-of-the-art listening post, shielded by the mountain itself. It was meant to be manned for a short duration, a test of its viability. September 21st, 1958. My calculations were correct. The granite strata here are uniquely suited to amplify distant tremors. But the geological surveys provided by the Clarion Mining Corporation were fraudulent. I have run the numbers a dozen times. They altered the core sample data.
This entire quadrant is unstable. They wanted this land for its uranium deposits, but the government had designated it a protected research area. They falsified the reports to have the designation lifted, claiming it was geologically worthless. I discovered their fraud. I reported it. The next day, I was volunteered for this assignment. Cole stopped reading, his knuckles white where he gripped the book. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. Abernathy had been silenced, buried alive with the truth. The railcar was his coffin, the tunnel his grave, dug by the very people he had sought to expose. The final entries were heartbreaking. Abernathy knew he was going to die. He gave up trying to make contact and instead dedicated his remaining time to documenting the crime. He detailed the names of the Clarion executives, the specific data points they had falsified, the location of the true geological surveys he had hidden. He even included a hand-drawn map. His last entry was short. May 11th, 1959. Supplies low. The air is growing thin. I do not know if this will ever be found, but truth, like water, will always find a way out. I pray it does. My name is Thomas Abernathy. I was a husband, a father, and a soldier. Remember me. Cole closed the book. The weight of it in his hands felt immense. This was no longer an archaeological curiosity. It was a murder, a 50-year-old crime scene. The silence of the mountain was not peace. It was the suffocating silence of a secret kept. He looked at Boone, whose gaze was fixed on him, steady and knowing. The dog had not found a tunnel. He had found a tombstone. Cole knew he couldn't walk away. The man he was trying to be, the isolated recluse, would have put the book back, sealed the door, and hiked until he forgot. But the man he used to be, the man who believed in duty and accountability, had been reawakened. Abernathy's quiet plea for remembrance had reached across the decades and found him. It was a new weight, a new responsibility. But unlike the ghosts of his past, this was a weight he could do something about. He needed more than a dead man's journal. He needed official records, maps, proof that would stand up to the Clarion Mining Corporation, or whatever it had become. The nearby town of Bishop's Creek wasn't much, a small cluster of buildings clinging to the side of the highway, but it had a county courthouse. That was where he would start. The next morning he broke camp. The decision felt momentous, a turning of a page in his own life. For months he had done nothing but retreat. Now he was advancing. He drove his old, dusty pickup truck down the winding mountain road, Boone sitting silently in the passenger seat. The dog seemed to sense the change in him, the new tension, the renewed purpose. Bishop's Creek was a town that time had largely forgotten. The county clerk's office was in a small stone building with a faded gold leaf sign. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and floor wax. A woman sat behind a high wooden counter, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked up at him over a pair of reading glasses, her expression one of polite, professional neutrality. She was in her late 50s, tall and spare, with the kind of competence that needed no announcement. "Can I help you?" Her voice was low and clear. "I'd like to see the plat maps for the Sierra Quadrant, Section 14, Cole said, keeping his voice even. "Specifically, any land grants or mining claims from the 1950s. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. It was a specific request. "That's a lot of archive to pull. Any particular research?" "Historical research," Cole said simply. It wasn't entirely a lie. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze sharp and assessing. She saw the jacket, the disciplined posture, the weariness in his eyes. "My name is Martha Riley. I'm the county clerk." "Those records are public, but they're fragile. I'll need you to be careful." "I will be," Cole assured her. She led him to a back room, a library of the county's history, filled with towering shelves of massive leather-bound books. She pointed him to a section. "Land grants and surveys, 1950 to 1960. Let me know if you need help deciphering the old survey markers." Cole spent the next 3 hours hunched over a heavy table, carefully turning the brittle pages of the survey books. He found it. Section 14. The original survey from 1952 designated the entire area as federal land, reserved for scientific study, just as Abernathy's journal had said. But then in 1957, there was an amendment. A new survey, commissioned by the Clarion Mining Corporation, was attached. It was filled with geological data declaring the land unstable and mineral poor. Based on that report, the federal designation was rescinded and Clarion was granted extensive mining rights to the adjacent parcels. It was all there, in black and white. The fraud, legitimized by an official-looking stamp. He was about to photograph the pages with his phone when Martha returned, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She set one down in front of him. "Find what you were looking for?" "I think so," Cole said, gesturing to the falsified report. "This survey, it's wrong." Martha looked at it, her expression unreadable. "A lot of things were wrong back then, when there was money to be made. Clarion was a big deal around here, promised jobs, dug a few holes, then packed up and left a decade later. Left a mess for the county to clean up." She tapped a name at the bottom of the survey. "Elias Thorne. He was the county surveyor who signed off on this. He's long gone, but his grandson, James, is still around. Runs a small engineering firm over on Main Street. Knows more about this land than anyone." It was a lead, offered quietly. Martha Riley was more than just a clerk. She was a gatekeeper, and she had just decided to let him pass. "Thank you," Cole said, meeting her eyes. A silent understanding passed between them. He found James Thorne's office in a small brick building that had once been the town's post office. Thorne was a man in his late 60s, with a wild mane of white hair and bright, intelligent eyes. His office was a chaotic mess of rolled-up blueprints, topographical maps, and geological charts. Cole didn't waste time. He laid out the story, minus the discovery of the rail car. He presented it as a historical query, a discrepancy he'd found in the records. He showed Thorne the 2 surveys. Thorne listened intently, his fingers steepled. He looked at the documents, his eyes tracing the lines and figures. "I remember my grandfather talking about this," he said slowly. "He was always ashamed of it. He said Clarion put immense pressure on him, threatened to ruin him, to blacklist him. He was a young man with a family, so he signed." Thorne looked up at Cole. "But he kept his own set of records, his personal field notes. He knew the Clarion survey was a lie. He said they were sitting on one of the richest uranium veins in the state,
and they buried the truth to get it cheap. Thorne stood up and walked to a tall metal filing cabinet in the corner. He rummaged through a drawer and pulled out a long cardboard tube. He unrolled it on the table. It was a detailed topographical map covered in his grandfather's spidery handwriting. "These are the real core sample results," Thorne said, his finger tracing a line that ran directly through Section 14. "The mother lode. And look at this." He pointed to a spot near the waterfall. There was a small, hand-drawn symbol and a note. AEC anomaly. Check access shaft. "Abernathy's listening post," Cole breathed. "My grandfather knew something was there," Thorne said. "He never knew what."
He was just told to survey around it. He always suspected Clarion's interest in the land wasn't just about the uranium. It was about getting rid of whatever that anomaly was. The pieces were slotting into place. Abernathy discovered the fraud. Clarion, with a vested interest in both the uranium and silencing a federal witness, arranged for his permanent deployment. They used their influence to have the land redesignated, effectively burying Abernathy and his evidence under a mountain of bureaucracy and rock. Cole now had the motive, the method, and the corroborating evidence. He had a dead man's testimony and a living man's confession. He rolled up the map. "Can I borrow this?" Thorne nodded. "My grandfather would have wanted the truth to come out. He carried that secret like a stone for 50 years. Be careful. The company that bought out Clarion's assets a few years back, they're a different breed. All lawyers and quiet threats." They're called Viridian Development. The name sent a chill through him. Viridian. A name that sounded clean, green, and utterly innocuous. The kind of name a company chose when it had a lot to hide. As Cole drove back up the mountain, the sky was darkening, heavy with clouds. A storm was coming. He felt it in the air, a familiar pressure change that signaled a shift in the world. He had the truth in a cardboard tube on the seat beside him. But the truth was not an end. It was a beginning. A beginning of a conflict he hadn't sought but could no longer avoid. He had disturbed a 50-year-old grave, and now its ghost was rising. He had a feeling he was about to meet the men who wanted to keep it buried. He returned to the waterfall as dusk was settling, the air thick and humid. The roar of the water seemed louder, more agitated. Boone was waiting for him right where he'd left him, a stoic shadow at the hidden entrance. The dog greeted him with a brief nudge of his nose against Cole's hand, a gesture of reassurance and shared purpose. Cole didn't go back to his campsite. His place was here now, guarding the entrance to Abernathy's tomb. He unrolled Thorne's map in the fading light, comparing it with the hand-drawn one from the journal. They were nearly identical. It was undeniable proof. He carefully placed both documents along with the journal inside a waterproof bag in his pack. This evidence was everything. He was checking the seal on his pack when Boone's head came up. The dog's body went tense, his gaze fixed on the narrow trail leading from the lake. Cole followed his line of sight. A man was walking towards them. He was not a hiker. He wore polished leather shoes, creased slacks, and a tailored blazer over a crisp button-down shirt. He was in his late 40s, with well-kept hair and a smile that was perfectly pleasant and utterly devoid of warmth. He moved with a quiet confidence, as if he were walking into a boardroom, not a remote patch of wilderness. He stopped about 20 feet away, his hands held loosely at his sides.
"Quite a spot," the man said, his voice calm and conversational. He gestured towards the waterfall. "The raw power of nature. It's easy to feel insignificant out here, isn't it?" Cole said nothing. He remained kneeling by his pack, his posture relaxed but ready. Every instinct, honed by years of identifying threats, was screaming. This man was dangerous, precisely because he didn't appear to be. "You must be the gentleman who's been asking questions down in Bishop's Creek," the man continued, his smile unwavering. "My name is Jennings. I'm with Viridian Development. We hold the land rights to this entire quadrant." Cole slowly rose to his feet. He stood between Jennings and the waterfall, a deliberate placement. Boone remained seated, but he had shifted his weight forward onto the balls of his feet.
He was a coiled spring. "The county records show this is federal land," Cole stated, his voice flat. Jennings gave a small, indulgent chuckle. "Ah, yes, a classic bureaucratic tangle. We're in the process of clearing that up, an old surveying error from the 50s. We're here to conduct an environmental reclamation project. Old mining operations left some liabilities. We're just cleaning up." He looked past Cole, his gaze lingering on the spot behind the waterfall. "We've detected a structural anomaly in the cliff face, a potential hazard. Our geological team needs to stabilize it." The language was smooth, corporate, designed to obscure. Bureaucratic tangle, liabilities, structural anomaly. He was talking about Abernathy's tomb as if it were a crack in the plaster. "I know what's in there," Cole said, his voice dropping low. Jennings' smile tightened by a fraction of an inch, the only sign that the shot had landed. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." "It's an old, collapsed exploratory shaft, according to our records. Unstable and unsafe. It's for your own safety that I have to ask you to vacate the area. This is now an active work site on private property." "A man named Thomas Abernathy died in there," Cole said. "He was left there by the Clarion Mining Corporation." The silence that followed was heavy, charged. The only sound was the thunder of the waterfall. Jennings's mask of civility finally slipped. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, hard appraisal. "Mister, I'm sorry I don't believe I caught your name," Jennings said, his tone shifting from polite to condescending. Cole didn't offer it. "Look," Jennings said, taking a step forward. "You stumbled onto a piece of unfortunate local history. A story best left where it is. It's out of context, misinterpreted. Continuing to pursue this will only lead to complications. Legal complications. Reputational complications. You're a man who clearly values his privacy." It would be a shame to see that compromised. It was a threat, wrapped in the language of concern. He was being warned off, his solitary life weaponized against him. They had looked into him. They knew who he was, or at least what he had tried to become. An outcast, a ghost, someone who wouldn't be missed, someone who wouldn't be believed. Cole felt a familiar, cold anger rise in him. It was the same veiled intimidation he had seen from corrupt officials overseas, the same smug certainty of men who believed power made them right. "The truth doesn't have a statute of limitations," Cole said quietly. Jennings sighed, a theatrical display of disappointment. "I was hoping you'd be reasonable. We have a legal right and a corporate responsibility to secure this site. We will be bringing in a team and equipment tomorrow morning. I strongly advise you not to be here when they arrive." As Jennings spoke, Boone, who had been preternaturally still, acted. He didn't move from his spot, but he lifted his head, drew back his lips, and exposed his teeth in a silent, deadly snarl. It was not an aggressive display, but a statement of fact, a promise. A low, guttural growl, like the sound of grinding rock, vibrated in his chest, just barely audible beneath the roar of the falls. Jennings froze. His gaze flickered from Cole to the dog, and for the first time a genuine emotion showed on his face. Fear. Not panic, but the cold, calculating fear of a man recognizing a capable and unpredictable threat.
He had been dealing with a man. He now realized he was also dealing with a wolf. He took a half step back, his composure rattled. "Keep your dog under control," he said, his voice tight. "He is under control," Cole replied calmly. Jennings stared for another long second, the pleasant mask gone for good.
He gave a curt, angry nod, turned without another word, and walked back down the trail. His stride now hurried, his polished shoes slipping on the damp ground. Cole watched him go. The confrontation had drawn a line in the dirt. The polite phase was over. Jennings had tried to buy him, then threaten him. Both had failed. Now he would use force. Cole looked down at Boone, who had relaxed his snarl but remained alert. He rested a hand on the dog's head, the thick fur a comfort. "Good boy," he murmured. The storm wasn't just in the clouds anymore. It was here, and it was about to break. Cole knew he couldn't hold them off forever. He needed to get the evidence to someone who could use it. He took out his satellite phone, a piece of gear he hadn't used in months, and dialed the number for the Bishop's Creek County office. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Martha Riley?" "It's the man who was looking at the maps," Cole said. "I found something. Something bad. And the people who buried it are here." The storm broke just after midnight. It arrived not with a gentle prelude of rain, but with a sudden, violent crack of thunder that seemed to split the sky. A moment later, the heavens opened up. Rain came down in solid, wind-driven sheets, lashing the trees and turning the ground to mud. The waterfall, already a powerful force, swelled into a raging, uncontrolled torrent, its roar deepening into a deafening, primal bellow. Cole and Boone were huddled in the relative shelter of the alcove behind the falls. Even there, the spray was a constant, soaking mist, and the wind howled through the opening, carrying the storm's fury into their small sanctuary. Cole had wedged his flashlight into a crevice in the rock, its beam a lonely beacon against the maelstrom. He had his back against the tunnel door, a physical barrier against the world. Boone lay at his feet, a warm, solid presence in the chaos. His head resting on his paws, but his ears constantly twitching, alert to every shift in the storm's symphony. Cole knew Jennings wouldn't wait for the weather to clear. The storm was cover. It provided chaos, muffled sound, and washed away evidence. They would use it to their advantage. His call to Martha Riley was a gamble. He had told her his location and the gist of what he'd found, urging her to contact the state authorities. But help, if it was coming at all, was hours away. The mountain roads would be treacherous, if not impassable. For now, he and Boone were on their own. Around 2 in the morning, he heard it. A new sound, cutting through the roar of the storm. The high-pitched whine of machinery and the guttural rumble of a heavy-duty engine. Boone's head lifted instantly, a low growl starting in his chest. Cole peered out through the curtain of water. Down by the lakeshore, beams from powerful work lights cut through the driving rain, illuminating a scene of grim industry. A large flatbed truck with a winch and a small crane was maneuvering into position. 3 figures in dark rain gear moved with professional efficiency, their forms silhouetted against the artificial light. Jennings was making his move. Their plan was obvious. They were going to use the winch to tear the iron door from its hinges. It was brutal, effective, and would destroy any chance of a clean investigation. They wanted to get into the rail car, retrieve whatever incriminating evidence Abernathy had left besides the journal, and then use explosives to collapse the tunnel for good, burying the secret forever under thousands of tons of rock. Cole's mind raced. He was one man against a prepared team. Direct confrontation was suicide. His only advantages were his knowledge of the terrain and the element of surprise. His past screamed at him, a chorus of tactical assessments and risk analyses. But underneath it all was the simple, quiet voice of Abernathy's last journal entry. Remember me. He had to slow them down, buy time for Martha's call to bear fruit. He checked the small pack he'd prepared, a length of rope, his knife, the flashlight. Not an arsenal, but tools. He looked at Boone. Stay, guard, he commanded, his voice sharp and clear even over the storm. The dog whined, a sound of protest, but obeyed, sinking back down, his eyes locked on Cole. Cole slipped out of the alcove, moving not down the main path but up, scrambling over the slick, mossy rocks to the side of the waterfall. The rain was blinding, the wind a physical blow. He moved with the practiced silence of a ghost, using the roar of the storm to cover the sound of his movements. He found a position on a ledge about 30 feet above the worksite, concealed by a thicket of soaked pine. From here, he could see everything.
Jennings was there, directing his men, his face a mask of grim determination under the hood of his expensive rain jacket. One of the men was setting up a generator, while the other two were hauling a thick steel cable from the winch toward the waterfall. They were struggling, the ground a slick morass of mud and rock. Cole saw his chance. Above them, loosened by the torrential rain, was a section of loose scree and a dead, half-rotted log held precariously in place by its roots. It wasn't large enough to be lethal, but it would cause chaos. It would disrupt their timeline. Using his rope, he carefully lowered himself down a few feet, found a purchase, and with a powerful shove from his legs, dislodged the log. It slid, gathering speed, and crashed down the slope with a shower of rocks and mud. It landed just short of the men, but the effect was instantaneous. They shouted in alarm, scrambling back. The generator sputtered as it was hit by a spray of mud and water, and the lights flickered and died, plunging the scene into near total darkness save for their headlamps. "What was that?" Jennings yelled over the wind. "Rock slide! The whole cliff is unstable," one of the men shouted back. It had worked. He had bought himself a few minutes. But as he prepared to climb back to a safer position, his foot slipped on a patch of wet moss. He fell, his body slamming hard against the rock face. He slid several feet before his hand caught a root, stopping his fall. A sharp, searing pain shot through his left shoulder. Dislocated. The old injury, a souvenir from a hard landing in Afghanistan, had returned. He hung there for a moment, gritting his teeth against the wave of nausea and pain. He could hear Jennings and his men regrouping below, their lights bobbing in the darkness. He had to move. Using his good arm, he started to haul himself up, his body screaming in protest.
It was then that he heard a desperate, frantic barking. It was Boone. The sound was wrong. It wasn't a warning. It was a cry of distress. Cole's blood ran cold. He scrambled the rest of the way up to the ledge and looked toward the alcove. One of Jennings's men, a large, burly figure, had circled around, flanking Cole's position. He must have seen Cole on the ledge. He was at the entrance to the alcove, a heavy crowbar in his hand, trying to get at the tunnel door. Boone was standing in his way, barking and snarling, refusing to give ground.
"Get out of the way, you stupid dog!" the man yelled, and swung the crowbar. It happened in a flash. Boone dodged the main force of the blow, but the heavy iron bar caught him on his back leg with a sickening crunch. The dog yelped, a sharp cry of pain, and his leg buckled beneath him. He fell, but even as he hit the ground, he snapped at the man's leg, his teeth sinking into the thick fabric of his pants.
The man roared in pain and anger, kicking viciously at the dog. Something inside Cole broke. The carefully constructed walls of detachment, the years of disciplined control, shattered into a million pieces. In that moment, he wasn't seeing a man and a dog. He was seeing a flashback, a memory burned into his soul. A dusty street, the scent of cordite, and his partner, bleeding out. He had been ordered to pull back,
to leave him, to secure the objective. And he had obeyed. He had chosen the mission over the man. The guilt of that choice was the ghost that haunted his every waking moment. Not again. Not this time. With a roar that was torn from the deepest part of his being, Cole launched himself from the ledge. He ignored the fire in his shoulder, the storm, the mission. None of it mattered. He landed on the slick ground, his legs absorbing the impact, and charged. The man with the crowbar turned, his eyes wide with surprise. He had no time to react.
Cole crashed into him with the force of a freight train. They went down in a tangle of limbs. Cole's training took over. Despite his injured shoulder, he moved with brutal efficiency. A single precise blow to the man's jaw, and he went limp. Cole scrambled over to Boone. The dog was whining, trying to get up, his back leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Cole gently ran his hands over the injury. It was a bad break. The sight of his partner, his friend, broken because of him, because of this fight, sent a wave of cold fury through him. He looked up. Jennings and the other man were running towards him, their headlamps cutting through the rain. They had seen what happened. Jennings had a small, compact pistol in his hand. "It's over," Jennings shouted, his voice strained. "Step away from the dog." Cole didn't move. He stayed by Boone's side, shielding him with his own body. He had made his choice. In his past, he had sacrificed his brother-in-arms for the objective. Here, now, he would sacrifice the objective, himself, everything, for the loyalty he owed the creature at his feet. He would not leave him. He would stay. This was his atonement. "I said move!" Jennings screamed, raising the pistol. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the storm, amplified by a megaphone. "Put the weapon down! This is the sheriff's department!" Headlights cut through the trees from the access road. 2 sheriff's department SUVs, their lights flashing, slid to a halt. Doors opened, and deputies took up positions, their weapons trained on Jennings and his man. In the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, Cole saw a familiar, stern face. Martha Riley. At the same time, the third man from Jennings's crew, the one who had been working on the winch, did something unexpected. He was a young man with a military-style haircut. Throughout the night, Cole had noticed his hesitation, his reluctance. He had seen the way the man looked at Jennings with a flicker of contempt. Now, as Jennings was distracted by the police, the young man quickly and quietly unhooked the main winch cable from the truck's anchor point. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in Cole's direction. The conflicted insider. A soldier who recognized another soldier and made his own choice. Jennings stared at the police, then back at Cole, his face a portrait of disbelief and fury. His plan, his carefully controlled operation, had just spectacularly unraveled. The storm raged on, but the battle was over. Cole gently stroked Boone's head, whispering to him, his voice thick with emotion. He had stayed, and this time, it had made all the difference. The morning after the storm was unnaturally quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening. The sky was a pale, fragile blue. The only sounds were the steady drip of water from the trees and the diminished, almost peaceful murmur of the waterfall. The area around the lake was no longer a secluded patch of wilderness. It was a formal crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the entrance to the alcove. The sheriff's department had been joined by state investigators and a team from the Historical Preservation Society. They moved with a quiet, respectful purpose, documenting everything, their voices low. Jennings and his crew were gone. Cole had watched them being led to the sheriff's cars, their faces sullen and defeated. Jennings had tried to bluster, talking about lawyers and lawsuits, but Martha Riley had silenced him with a single, cold look
and a file folder she produced from her briefcase. It contained copies of Thorne's map and key pages from Abernathy's journal. The polite antagonist had lost his power the moment the truth was exposed to the light. Cole sat on the tailgate of his truck, a steaming mug of coffee in his good hand. His left arm was in a sling, his shoulder aching with a dull, persistent fire.
But it was a clean pain, a physical pain. It was nothing compared to the wounds he had carried for years. Boone lay on a thick blanket in the bed of the truck, his broken leg professionally splinted and bandaged by a veterinarian who had been summoned from a nearby town in the middle of the night. The dog was on painkillers, his eyes a little hazy, but he was calm. Every few minutes he would lift his head and look at Cole, a silent check-in. Cole would meet his gaze, and a profound, unspoken understanding would pass between them. "We're okay. We're together." Martha Riley walked over, her practical boots making soft sounds on the damp earth. She handed him a small, sealed evidence bag. Inside was the logbook. "The state prosecutor says this is personal property. It belongs to Abernathy's family, if they can be found. Until then, he said its caretaker should hold on to it." Her eyes met his. "You earned it." "What happens now?" Cole asked, his voice hoarse. "Viridian development is finished," Martha said, her tone clipped and final. "Their corporate charter is under review, and Jennings is facing a host of federal charges, starting with conspiracy and assault. This place," she swept her hand towards the waterfall, "is being declared a state historical monument. The Abernathy listening post. His story won't be forgotten again." She paused. "The young man from Jennings's crew, the one who helped you. He's ex-Army. He gave a full statement. Said he knew something was wrong from the start. He's the reason the winch cable failed." She looked at Cole. "It seems you have a habit of inspiring loyalty." The words hit him harder than any physical blow. Inspiring loyalty. It was the opposite of the failure that had defined him. He had to look away, his throat tight. As he turned his head, he saw a car approaching on the access road. It was a simple rental sedan, out of place among the official vehicles. It parked, and a woman got out. She had his eyes, his dark hair, though hers was threaded with a little more gray. It was his sister, Sarah. He hadn't seen her in 2 years, not since he had disappeared into his self-imposed exile, cutting off everyone who reminded him of the man he had been. He had called her from the sheriff's office that morning, a brief, stilted conversation. He hadn't asked her to come. He had just needed to hear her voice. But she had come anyway. She walked towards him, her expression a mixture of worry, relief, and a deep, familiar sadness. She stopped a few feet away, her arms crossed as if to hold herself together. "You called," she said simply. "I did," he managed to say. Her eyes took in the sling, the exhaustion on his face, the bandaged dog in the back of the truck. Her composure cracked. "Oh, Cole." She closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him, careful of his injured shoulder. He flinched at the contact, his body unused to it. Then slowly, with his good arm, he hugged her back. He buried his face in her shoulder, and the dam he had built inside himself for so long finally broke. He didn't sob, but a deep, shuddering tremor ran through him, a release of years of unshed grief, guilt, and loneliness. It was a silent, profound surrender. "It's okay," she whispered, her hand stroking his hair. "It's okay. I'm here." Later, after Sarah had fussed over him and made him eat a sandwich, he found himself standing by the edge of the lake. He looked at his reflection in the still, clear water. For years he had avoided his own gaze in mirrors, seeing only the face of a man who had failed, who had run.
Now he saw something different. He saw the lines of exhaustion, the gray in his stubble, the pain in his shoulder. But he also saw a flicker of the man he once was, a man who stood for something. He didn't look away. Martha and Sarah approached him. "The state needs a caretaker for this land, now that it's protected," Martha said, her tone casual but her intent clear. "Someone who knows it, someone who respects it. It's not much, just a small stipend and a cabin over on the North Shore. But it's a start." Cole looked from the calm face of the county clerk to the hopeful eyes of his sister. He looked at the waterfall, no longer a place of secrets, but of revelation. He thought of Abernathy's quiet courage. He thought of Boone's unwavering loyalty. He had come here to disappear. But this mountain, this dog, this long-buried secret, had found him. They had given him a reason not to run, but to stay. "I'll take it," he said. The words felt solid, real, a foundation. A measure of peace settled over him, as quiet and profound as the mountain air. It wasn't a victory. It was a beginning. A chance to build a new life, not on the ashes of the old one, but on the hard-won ground of a second chance.
6 months later, the snows had come and gone, and the mountains were dressed in the vibrant green of late spring. Cole stood on the porch of the small, rustic cabin that was now his home. It overlooked the lake, and from here he had a clear view of the waterfall, a steady white plume against the dark granite. The M65 jacket was hung on a peg inside. He wore a simple flannel shirt, its sleeves rolled up to his forearms. The sling was gone, his shoulder healed into a network of strong scars. He held a mug of coffee, its warmth seeping into his hands. The military watch was still on his wrist, but its ticking no longer felt like a countdown. It felt like a rhythm, a steady beat in a life that had finally found its tempo. He had work to do here. He maintained the trails, monitored the wildlife, and served as the unofficial guardian of the Abernathy site, which now had a simple bronze plaque telling its story. He spoke to the occasional group of hikers or students, his words spare but meaningful. He was a part of the world again, on his own terms. A sound came from the doorway behind him. Boone limped out onto the porch, his back leg now healed but with a permanent stiff gait, the mark of their battle. He walked to Cole's side and rested his great, graying head on Cole's knee. Cole ran his hand over the dog's ears, the familiar texture a source of constant comfort. "Look at that boy," Cole said softly, his gaze on the waterfall. "Still running." Boone made a soft sound in his throat, a contented rumble. They stood there together, two old soldiers who had found their peace not in forgetting the war, but in winning a different kind of fight. Cole had come to the mountains seeking an ending, a quiet place to fade away. Instead, he had found a beginning. He had learned that redemption isn't about erasing the past, but about choosing a different future. It was a quiet miracle, delivered by a faithful dog and a voice that had refused to be silenced. The mountain no longer felt like a place of exile. It felt like home. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the promise of a life rebuilt, one quiet, steady day at a time. He had finally stopped running. He was home.